So welcome everyone and thank you for joining us today in our InfoSec seminar organized by the Information Systems Security and Assurance Management Department in Mahalshan School of Management. We begin our March InfoSec seminar by acknowledging that although this seminar is being held virtually, Concordia University of Edmonton is located on Treaty 6 territory and a traditional meeting ground and home for many indigenous peoples, including Cree, Saulteaux, Blackfoot, Métis, and Nakota Sioux peoples. We respect and acknowledge this. We are pleased to welcome Dr. Alison Yakshan, QS Dean of Management, who joined us today for this great InfoSec seminar. And today, we are pleased to introduce our guest speaker, Andrew Humphrey, to give us an interesting talk about the evolution of modern security. Andrew is an account manager at Trend Micro. Andrew has held roles in the channel national account and currently at Trend Micro. So thanks, Andrew, for being with us today and sharing your experience with our audience. Just two quick notes. During the presentations, microphones will be turned off to avoid interrupting the speaker. At the end, we will have 10 to 15 minutes for questions, and microphones will be turned back on. Please limit yourself to one question to give opportunity to other participants to ask. If we have enough time, please feel free to re-ask again. Please be sure to provide us with your name and email address in the linked form so we may send you your certificate of attendance. Thanks, and it's all yours, Andrew, now.
Okay, fantastic. Well, thanks so much for having me today. It's a pleasure for me to be here. Able to meet Sean a couple months ago and Islam as well. So when the opportunity came up, I certainly wanted to chat with the students there and really faculty and anyone who's on the call and just chat about sort of the changes that are going on in cybersecurity. So that's really the focus of this today, and it's really pushed by how technology is evolving. So as technology evolves and how we use it evolves, how we secure it needs to do that as well. So if you look at really what's happening in modern cybersecurity, it's exactly that. It's basically adapting to the way that the environment is changing. So initially you had some legacy thing, you had computers, you had, maybe an email account, some really basic, needs for your security. So you would secure those through, any number of companies and you would be set. But as that sort of network of infrastructure and of technology you have in your environment gets more and more complex, you would then add another security product. So just look at the slide here. You'd be doing some collaboration tools in the cloud. So you'd be starting to use Dropbox or SharePoint. So you would need some kind of a collaboration security tool. So you require that. And then everyone starts working from home. So now you start looking at using, let's say, maybe a VPN for your employees logging in. So you go out and buy a VPN, and now you have that as well. You're looking to move some of your old servers into the cloud because you don't want to, rebuy or sort of update these servers. So you start, basically hosting these things in the cloud. So when you do that, you buy some cloud security. And the problem is, as that continues to happen, you keep hearing me say, buy some security, buy some security, but you're just buying different products in every space. So then you really find yourself using, many, many security products that aren't speaking to each other. And as the IT person, you're sort of trying to manage all that, which has really created a problem. And it's a problem because it's a complex environment and it's only becoming more and more complex as time goes by. So in any of these, whether it be in the cloud or in email, there's all these different sort of vulnerabilities, all these different problems that can happen. And as this, this environment gets more complex, another sort of factor that goes into this is how much more sophisticated and complex these bad actors are getting. So they have every sort of, title for them. Some would refer to them as bad actors or hackers or whatever they wanted to be looked at as generally, cyber criminals. They're getting much more sophisticated. They're utilizing AI. They're setting up very much, like a business. So as you have more and more of yourself exposed to the internet from a business perspective, they are able to really, really hone in on those elements. And they have really good technology, really good knowledge, really good funding. So they can really start to exploit those things. So if you have a bunch of independent cybersecurity products that aren't speaking to each other, that really is for the cyber criminal an ideal scenario for them, because they're going to try and get in, kind of wiggle in between them, sort of find your blind spots and get in there. So that's really how it starts to evolve. It starts to look at, well, how do we do a better job of what this diagram really it shows is that now you've got these, 5, 6, maybe 10, 15 security products, and they're all sending you alerts. And then security analyst is sort of the center person here. Often enough, funny enough, it's not even a security analyst necessarily that is in that central role. A lot of times it's an IT manager or someone who's different, like a system analyst, but someone who maybe wasn't really prepared or trained on cybersecurity. You could be, a law firm of a couple hundred people, and you're the IT manager there who has been tasked with cybersecurity. And now as your environment has become more complex, now you're running, say, 5 or 6 different security consoles. They're all sending alerts to you. And you are the single point, or this IT manager is a single point of success or failure in this equation. So from a business risk perspective, this is a really bad scenario to find yourself in. If this person calls in sick or they want to go on vacation, or maybe it's just Saturday night and it's 2 a.m. and they're not monitoring their emails when something goes wrong, you've really left yourself in a spot where, this is just not going to work. And not only that is it not going to work, but you're going to burn out that person in the middle, and they're probably going to move on to, something that's going to work a little better for them. So it's not working, and it's only becoming more and more complex. So we know it's going to become more and more of a problem if we continue to operate this way. So like anything, and these just kind of outline some of those issues, right? Alert fatigue. So taking a ton of alerts from a ton of different consoles, or look at many dashboards, these gaps that happen between them. So you don't really see if someone maybe is in your email and they're also that same issue actor is on your server, but alone, they don't really have any issue, but correlated, you start to see how this attack is taking shape, but you need a program that can correlate the data from both of those pieces of security. And then it's difficult to conduct investigations. So if you have this, spread out or this sort of siloed security structure, if something goes wrong, you have a breach or you have any kind of a problem, it's then on your security analyst to look at what happened. So they have to do basically an investigation and say, okay, how did they get in? Where did they move to? What did they compromise? How long were they here? What data did they have access to? And you're taking days to do this analysis to report back to your owner or your C-suite, whoever it is. And that's really too long. So you're taking a ton of time. It's too slow. So it really just, as a security person, not providing really strong security. It gives you this slow detection time is essentially the big problem here. And, buzzword of shelfware, but just the idea of that, if you have, say 10 consoles you're trying to look through, the reality is you're not utilizing all of them. Some of them are just sitting there, and there are probably alerts in there. There's probably unread messages from that console, but they're just not being monitored because it's just too much to monitor. So that's where the concept of XDR, or extended detection and response, comes into play. And that's really what you're seeing as the biggest thing in the market today. And it really depends who you're speaking with. Probably for a lot of the students on this call, and certainly, some of the professors, they'll be well aware of what XDR is and how that's going to provide you better security than a traditional security product. But as you're looking at, moving forward and trying to present, if you're a student, on this call, and you need to present in your first role to your C-suite why they need XDR, or maybe you go to work at a cybersecurity company, you need to be able to present or work on or utilize these things. Well, then you need to really have a good understanding of what this is. And you need to understand how to explain that to other people who may not really know what it is. So you can Google it and get a definition. You can go to Trend Micro's website and get a definition. But in its simplest form, it is having all of your security products talk to each other. And they're all going to report all the information into a single dashboard. And then you are going to utilize that dashboard to monitor all of security in your infrastructure, and all from one place. So visually, what does that look like? Well, you're going to have, whether it be your network security, say like a firewall or something, your email gateway, you're going to have your endpoint security, you're going to have whatever kind of workload security you're using on your cloud or your on-premise servers. And they're all going to dump their logs and all their data into this XDR data lake. It's all going to populate into your XDR dashboard, and it's going to give you an idea of what's going on in your environment. This changes the way that we look at security, because traditionally, security was about building up really strong walls. You can sort of think of it like the city of Troy, like just really build up a really strong wall and hope no one gets in. And if someone does get in, we've got a lot of trouble here. And we were seeing that in the environment. You'll see that in some of the really big breaches you see that get mentioned in, say, like in media, Uber was one last year that was a really big one. And what was interesting there was it talked about how long these bad actors were actually in their infrastructure before they were caught. And that really comes down to having really strong walls, but not doing a good job of monitoring the internal, what's going on inside. So moving from security being really strong walls to being this extended detection and response, we start measuring our security's effectiveness with things like mean time to detect and mean time to respond. So we're not looking at, are you going to get breached? Because the reality is at some point, you're going to have some kind of a bad actor in your environment. But the question is, how quickly can you detect that? So when someone is coming in and let's say they through like a phishing email or through some kind of like a brute force attack on your MFA, anything like this, they've gotten into your environment. So typically they get in a very small footprint and they need to spread in your environment. They need to reach out to the internet and download more files. There's a lot of setup work they need to do to really get into a spot where they can start exfiltrating data, or they can lock you up and ransomware you. And there's a lot of setup stages. So what you want is a really strong XDR platform in place where we can detect these setup steps. So we can say, okay, we see something's going on with this email account. It's accessed all these files in this server that this user should never access. It then called out to the internet to a website that we're familiar with, and it downloaded these 5 files. And it says, okay, this is very suspicious activity. So we're going to isolate all those pieces of infrastructure that this is happening on, and we're going to do investigation. And once they're isolated, you pretty much have stopped that threat actor, and you're going to isolate it and basically produce a report saying, this is what happened. This is what we found. This is how we shut it down. So it gives you that really quick time to detect, which is going to avoid some problems. The other part, the response. So when you have an XDR solution in place, you can respond more thoroughly. So rather than, your email security or maybe your endpoint security picking up a problem and removing that problem, in an XDR scenario, it sees everywhere that problem is moved in your infrastructure, and it removes it from all of those points. So it fully removes it, so you don't have to worry about anything being left behind where they continue to work from. So that's really the biggest when you start looking at the evolution is instead of having all these independent products, let's have them all talking to each other in one dashboard and being able to detect problems very quickly in our environment and completely remove them in our environment. And that's the way cybersecurity is moving. So that's one of the biggest things right now we're looking at, as someone who I work in cybersecurity. Our main focus is making sure all of our clients have an XDR solution in place because that's really what's getting sort of pushed to them. And it's getting pushed from a lot of different places. And one thing I'll just sort of touch on before I go into some of the business drivers of XDR. Part of using an XDR solution is the data that comes along with it. So when you start pulling in logs from your firewall, pulling in telemetry data from all your email and your endpoints, and you're starting to correlate that, these XDR solutions are using machine learning to detect new ransomware and new malware. Traditionally, cybersecurity worked more in a style of having lists of known malware, and then you would have your cybersecurity software. With anything coming in, it would just compare, okay, this file that's coming in, is this known malware? It's not, okay, let it in. Oh, it's known malware. We've seen this before. Okay, block it. So that's not entirely effective when you get, and especially when the bad actors start to realize, how you're detecting them. They're just going to develop new or slightly changed malware. So what you need to do is have all this data and use that then to be able to basically do some investigation like a detective would and say, okay, we're looking at a file. What characteristics does it have? Does it have characteristics of files that are typically associated with malware? Different, executables, different things like this. So that's where we start getting all that data. And one of the ways that we do that, or that it's done in the environment, is by typically what I look at is ethical hackers finding exploits, in products and basically selling those exploits to a company like ZDI or Zero Day Initiative. And then they are going to go out there and notify all the security companies of this exploit, and they're going to write patches for it into their security so that anyone using that software isn't going to have that risk. So that's where that Zero Day Initiative comes from. You can submit called a bug bounty program is typically the way it's referred to, and you can submit bugs to it, and they pay you for them. And then they basically those bugs are then incorporated into security. And it also they often run a bunch of contests. You might be familiar with the Pwn to Own contests. So this is what ZDI runs these contests, and it's a way for them to buy bugs essentially. So you could go in there and they might have a device. Once they've had a Tesla car, they've had some other devices, and they basically have all these ethical hackers try and hack into this Tesla car, find all the ways that they can do it. They then submit all of that data to Tesla, and then Tesla patches those things so that can't happen. A really good and recent example of that is the Microsoft Smart Screen exploit that happened about 2 weeks ago. So Microsoft launched that patch for it. So this was an exploit initially submitted to Zero Day Initiative and then pushed out to security companies. And at that point, and you can kind of get into the details here in the diagram, but when Zero Day Initiative gets this exploit, they then can send that to, or they do send that to Microsoft and give Microsoft X amount of time, depending on the severity of the exploit, to patch it themselves. So they give Microsoft the exploit, Microsoft patches it on their own timeline, and then Microsoft tells the public about this exploit and the patch for it, which why it's so important to be updating your systems and applying patches, because the reason they're getting written is because there's an active exploit happening and you need that patch to stop it. And these XDR solutions are ingesting all of that information and making sure they have all that up to date. And when you have them deployed in the cloud, they're very good at automatically deploying those updates. This is kind of just a sort of diagram of how it works, but it's really just to present the idea that all of these things are working together. So you're looking at things, and we'll touch on a little bit later, like attack surface risk management or zero trust, all of your infrastructure, all the, XDR sort of connecting it all together. It really just is having a really connected solution. Is the best way to look at it. It increases your security, it lowers your costs, and it just makes it much, much easier to manage a complex infrastructure. So this would be sort of a better example. If you recall the example earlier on where we had this diagram and all kind of pointing at one person in the middle, well, your XDR solution is the purple line here, and it basically just draws this map. So you follow the line. Okay, here's something that came in through an email. It went to these, 3 users. It went into, your internal systems. It went out to some OT structure you had in place. So it basically moved all the way through here. It was detected by an XDR, solution, and then it presented those findings to your security analyst or to your IT manager and said, hey, this is what we found. This is what we've stopped. And, this is what you need to do to basically correct those things. So you can imagine here what really the biggest difference is. It's removed that human being as sort of the linchpin in all of your security, because you're trying to lower risk. So having, a human element right at the core of it is pretty high risk. So this will do it all. And it's all basically can be as automated as a user wants it to be. So you're looking at doing different automated playbooks and sandboxing, things like this. Some users really like to be hands-on and they want to have it in a situation where they're kind of walking through that whole thing. Others set up playbooks. So if anything goes wrong in their environment, it's all automatically going to be taken care of through their XDR solution. And then it's not just, your cybersecurity. So like your IT manager or your security or your, security operations center managers want this. But the question, a lot of times they want a lot of things. I mean, people in IT, they want a lot of cool tech gadgets. And I mean, I do too. Who wouldn't? But a lot of times, the management or the finance team or your C-suite are going to say, well, why? Like, why do we need these things? And with XDR, this is, it's a very much a justified expense. The C-suite is going to be tasking their IT team with increasing their security because, they need to reduce their business risk, and they're hearing from their colleagues and they're seeing it in the newspaper, and they're going to be asked by their shareholders or whoever it is, that's, sort of like kind of the finance of the company saying like, are we at the same risk as company A that was breached last month? And you need to have a really good answer to that question. And XDR provides you that answer by saying, yeah, we have great security in place. This is how it works. And so that's a lot of the drivers there. It's going to simplify things for overworked IT teams, which is a very common thing. So if IT teams are often looking for additional personnel and they're not able to get that funding approved, a lot of times that's where you're going to see someone say, okay, well, if we can't have 1 or 2 more people in our security team, we need an XDR solution in place to really take over that for us. So that's when you see a driver of that. And another really interesting point here is cyber insurance. So a lot of businesses now are mostly, all are looking to have themselves insured against cybercrime. So just like anything, you might insure your car, your home. When you insure your car, they're going to ask, do you have snow tires? What's your driving record like? All these things, and they're going to assign you a rate. Well, the same thing goes with cybersecurity and cyber insurance. if you're trying to obtain cyber insurance, they're going to say, okay, well, what kind of security do you have in place? Do you have an XDR? And one of the main questions they ask is, do you have an XDR solution in place? And if you do, depending on the company, some that's going to allow them to insure you, and others it's just going to allow you to give you a more reasonable rate. And I always like to say, for anyone out there who's still on the fence about XDR, if the actuaries at insurance companies are saying that an XDR solution is going to save that insurance company money, I mean, the proof's in the pudding that it works, I think, at that point. If the math guys are saying, hey, anyone we're going to insure needs to have this and it's going to save us claims, it's because it does. It's not because they think it's a neat tool to play with. So that really is a transition that we're seeing right now in the marketplace. Depending how sort of well-versed you are in the marketplace, you might be really familiar with XDR, or you might just be sort of just starting to hear about it and just starting to want to implement it in your business or in any way that you're sort of, operating, depending on, who you are on this call. But it is very much something that's been around. I don't want to give it a timeline because it's sort of evolved, but it's what people are moving to right now as far as having the solution in place. They want an XDR solution in place. So that's kind of where we sit today. And then as you kind of look forward, the question becomes, well, what's next? Because it's never, the end of the road, right? It's an ongoing sort of roadmap of how you're growing your security. And one of the pieces that people look to do when they add XDR is they like to add what's called managed XDR. So this is really
Hello, Andrew. Sorry to interrupt you because we have two questions about the same thing.
Sure.
Are you able to see the chat or?
We can pull it up here. Yeah. Where are we here?
So the difference between XDR and SIM?
Yeah, absolutely. One element I would say is just the names of them. Like a lot of it is just having a name, but really the core differences, like a SIEM is really a product that is going to be an umbrella over all of your software. It's going to ingest it and it's going to sort of monitor it for you. Whereas an XDR solution typically is going to include the actual products themselves and have them all kind of tie in together. So whereas or a SOAR, or sometimes like a SOC analyst, like a SOC as a service. These are groups that are doing that. Whereas an MXDR is really just like the software where it has, like, for example, for Trends, it's all native. So we have our own email, our own endpoint, our own security on like IoT devices, and they all filter into our dashboard. And that's our MXDR solution. It's a little different than SIEM. And I have Shashi here actually, who is our senior solution engineer with Trend Micro. And I see he has his hand up. And I know Sashi really well. And I think he probably has a better answer to that question than I do, because he's really, well-versed in that. So I'll let him answer that now too, if he can kind of maybe correct me or corroborate kind of my seeing there.
Yeah. Thanks, Andrew. Are you guys able to hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Just to add to what Andrew already described, that's a pretty good explanation of how XDR and SIM are different. But just to add to that, we get this question a lot. Do I really need a SIM if we have an XDR? What we need to know is, and what the students here, everybody need to know is, what SIM does is basically a log aggregator from literally everything happening in your environment, right? Like across the environment, it's aggregating it together and then try to make sense of it. You are still kind of looking at kind of needle in a haystack kind of a situation. Whereas what XDR, if you have a good robust XDR solution, what it is able to do is it is able to add that context to those individual log items what you may be collecting. So it actually in most situations it enhances those SIMs, because when the SOC analysts or the analysts who are looking at the SIM dashboard, they are getting contextual alerts that, okay, this endpoint of this server or this specific user, whatever, it has this specific threat related event, so that you're not trying to make sense of all those logs. Rather, you're getting an actual input of what you need to do, of what has been impacted, right? So it's more security focused, but it adds a lot more context to what SIM is already doing by enhancing those SIM solutions in place. Hope that answers.
Yeah, that was great. Thank you so much, Shashi. And certainly if anyone has questions, feel free to drop them into the chat, and SLM, feel free to interrupt me, and we're happy to sort of address them. That's really the idea. We want to educate the best we can here. But certainly, as it is an educational institution, so happy to have questions throughout. Absolutely. And just to sort of put myself back to where I was sort of talking about MXDR, which essentially managed XDR. So it's this XDR solution, everything kind of feeding into that singular dashboard. But then rather than having, your IT manager or your SOC analyst or anyone like this monitoring that, you're actually hiring someone out, in our case, Trend, because that's, what I do. They're monitoring it for you and monitoring it 24/7. And depending on how you have it structured, they're going to be, taking actions, presenting you with information, everything like this. The reason that MXDR right now, or MDR, is looked at so favorably and is so popular is because of the people shortage as SOC analysts, as these kind of security professionals. So anyone on here is a student and is going to look at being a SOC analyst, or anyone in that sort of security monitoring, you're going into a great field, because it is a sought after field. Like, there just aren't enough people in there who can do this. So if you were, let's say you're an engineering firm of, say a couple hundred people, and you're the IT team, and you're tasked with monitoring your XDR solution, you're tasked with monitoring it 24/7. So you'd have to spin up a SOC team, and you'd have to have them monitoring it 24/7. So you would be looking at, to run 24/7, you need 5, 6, maybe 7 people running in shifts, and you're really just relying on how quickly someone can monitor this at 3 a.m. if that's their shift. So you got a lot of variability, like a risk, because these people could move into other roles. So some of your SOC analysts could leave, and really you're just not getting the best of a worker at 3 a.m. So you bring in a managed XDR solution somewhere like Trend, or any of the big companies out there, these international companies. They're monitoring it 24/7, but they're monitoring it 24/7 during the day throughout the world. So they have SOC analysts working, your regular Monday to Friday, 9 to 5, with weekends, but they're monitoring it during that regular shift. So they're able to do that much more efficiently. So that's where we're seeing a lot of medium-sized businesses, really, really large corporations. They likely run their own SOC team. They just, like, your Coca-Colas of the world, if you will, they're probably running their own SOC team. But if you're in that sort of that 1 to 500 employees, it just financially is not viable. And you can't ask your IT manager to make sure he doesn't miss an alert at Sunday at 3 a.m. because eventually they will, right? Eventually they're human beings. So that's where this managed piece comes in. We really encourage it. It really adds a really strong layer to your security. Just one question there. Let me just pop that up and see here. Yeah. Okay. So off the top of my head, I don't have the exact data on XDR or sort of who's doing that. Like, as far as like market share, I will say that some of the biggest players out there right now. I'll name my competitor by name here, which is kind of funny, but I mean, it's meant to be educational, so I'm happy to do it. So CrowdStrike, their Falcon XDR platform is pretty good. You probably saw them running like a Super Bowl commercial, so they're pretty well known and they're pretty popular right now, I would say. Other ones are like Palo Alto Cortex. So Palo Alto being the company and Cortex being the product is another great XDR product. Of course, I have to mention Trend Micro. Ours is called Vision One. And while the industry analysts were marked as a leader, so all these analysts, the way that sort of security or software in general is sort of analyzes, they have these market experts, and they put out reports periodically, and they rate everyone in the industry, and they have these different 4 quadrants. You could be like a leader or a lagger or innovator and all these things. So we're always marked as a leader in that top quarter with products like CrowdStrike, Palo Alto Cortex. And so those are probably the biggest 3 as companies that actually do, like, they do the actual products and the monitoring of them. And then there are some that are more sort of like just monitor focused, like your Arctic Wolf and some different products like that they're doing a good job of providing an XDR solution, but really doing it by monitoring other companies. So you could have, like, let's say you have like, your Barracuda email, your Trend Micro endpoint, and, someone else in your cloud. And then you would have like an Arctic Wolf using all of those, ingesting the data from all of them, and then presenting you with that single dashboard. So there's a couple ways to kind of get there. As far as learning about it, I would say, and I can post the link in the chat here while Shashi's doing the demo, so I'll pull it up. Your Trend Micro's website's great. Just Googling it, let's say like YouTube. There's some great YouTube channels. I know Trend Micro has their own channel. Some of our competitors do as well. So you can get a lot of really good data there. I encourage you to go on LinkedIn. If you are a student now and soon to be graduating, I would strongly encourage you to have a really robust LinkedIn profile. And what you want to do on there is you want to follow industry influencers. So people who are experts in XDR, people who are experts in MDR or SOC. I follow my own company. I follow all of my competitors. I follow, my colleagues. I follow my competitors, employees. because you want to know everything going on in the industry. And the real people are the ones who are really at the forefront of that. So it's a great place to be. If you're looking for a job, it's a great place to be. If you're looking for knowledge, it's a great place to be, assuming you're following the right people. So just really make sure you're being selective in who you follow, and you're getting some really good content that way. But that's all I'll sort of touch on from a product perspective. But there's definitely a couple of really big players out there. Sorry, 1 sec. My presentation seems to be a bit frozen here. There we go. So one thing you will see, like an XDR solution is great, and it's the best we have in that type of solution right now in the market, but it's still very reactive. You're kind of trying to protect yourself, and if something does go wrong, you've got a really good solution in place to try and fix it. But ultimately, you're still reacting to problems. So you want to get out ahead of that a little bit. And this is another thing that security is sort of moving into, is that proactive approach. So looking at something, Trend Micro is called attack surface risk management. You'll see it by any similar name to that. Risk management, attack surface analysts, different names like this, but they all really mean the same thing. And ideally, what they're trying to do is look at what's going on in someone's environment and what was creating that risk. I'm sorry, I'm taking a little trouble with my slide. It doesn't seem to want to advance here again. What's going on here? Okay. Sorry. So if you were an IT manager, and I always make this joke when I chat with IT managers, and they always nod like, oh yeah, we know who you're talking about. So if you have a company of 100 people, you have 4 or 5 users who are significantly riskier than the rest of the people in your company. And as I say, the IT managers always know who these guys are. They're the ones that are letting their kids play Roblox on their work computer. They're maybe a salesman and they're traveling, so they're on a lot of different like social media sites and things like that. In the hotel room in the evenings on their work laptops, just doing any number of things, signing in from coffee shops all the time, whatever it happens to be. So basically, an ASRM or attack surface risk management product is going to basically break out all your individual users, all your pieces of infrastructure, and it's going to assign them a risk score based on their activity. So ours happens to give you like a benchmark. So let's say we're talking like an oil and gas engineering firm. So the average risk score is a 60 for oil and gas engineering firms. The current client I'm working with, hypothetically, is a 70. And they're going to say, Andrew, why are we a 70? Why are we so risky? You say, okay, well, you've got these 5 users who are logging in from all these different places. They're visiting all these different websites. They're doing all these different things. They're not using, say, these different products we have put in place for them, maybe MFA or VPN or whatever it is. So they're significantly more risky. So you've got these couple users who are in the 80s or 90s, and it's going to give you corrective actions. So it's going to say, okay, block these websites, initialize these things, initialize these password criteria, do all these different things. They're going to reduce that risk score. So then once you reduce those riskiest users, then your overall risk score lowers. This is great for 2 reasons. One, it's a question that's commonly asked by the C-suite to the IT people or to the security people. And it's a hard thing to answer tangibly, because when someone says, what's our risk? You can kind of say like, oh, I think we're pretty good. I like Trend Micro, we use them. I'm satisfied, but like, it's not quantifiable. So when you use an ASRM tool, you can say, okay, so now I'm talking to my C-suite in my oil and gas company. I can say, okay, well, the average oil and gas company's risk is 60. Ours used to be 70 because of these users. We took these corrective actions, and now we're at 60. We're at the industry average. We have a plan over the next 6 months to, initiate all of these new plans or these new projects, and that's going to lower us to a 50. So we're going to be actually below the industry average. So now your C-suite is saying, love it. So now we not only know our risk score, but we're doing things to affect it. So that's a really, really positive thing and a proactive way to solve it. This is just pulling up sort of one individual user and looking at some of the things they do. One of the things I always find really interesting is looking at, where it talks about where your assets are located. Another way that map is sometimes used, it's looking at where people log in from. So it's going to look at, to see if someone is, a risky or like a breached, user. It's going to look at, well, where are they logging in from? And is that unusual login activity because they don't usually travel to Japan for business? Or is it literally impossible travel activity in that they logged in from, from Edmonton, at noon today, and then at 3 o'clock they logged in from Central Europe. Okay, well, that, regardless of business travel, like that's not possible. So we know that's a breached user because someone's trying to use those credentials to log in a different place. So that would assign them a very high risk score. And these ASRM tools can say, okay, this risk score of this user spiked, so we're going to isolate that user. So they used to be a 60 risk score. They all of a sudden jumped up to a 90. So the first thing we do is isolate that account. So you'll find that user can no longer log in because we know that's going to be the breach point. That's going to be where our problem comes from that takes down our whole network. Because that is always the case when you typically do look into these breaches. It's typically a risky user or someone with risky behavior that kind of lets someone into your environment. So you want to really reduce those riskiest people. Another one we see sort of coming up is zero trust network access, sometimes called zero trust secure access, sometimes just called zero trust. And really, this is the evolution of VPNs or virtual private networks. So virtual private networks really work really well, and consumers are aware of them because a lot of consumers use them, right? It's if you're an individual user, you use a VPN, it allows you to make credit card purchases online. It does, yeah, so threat intel management, and I'm not exactly familiar with that acronym, but I would imagine that would just be another company's name for what they're calling their attack surface risk management. If so, that's just to address a question in the chat if anyone was wondering. And you'll just find different companies are going to call these things different things. So users are using a VPN to protect things when they do shopping online, protects their credit card, does different things like this. It protects the end user. And you'll see companies a lot of times that will use a VPN when people are logging in to their internal infrastructure from external sources. So when everyone started working from home, companies send out VPNs. So you'd have to log in with a VPN to access internal databases, internal networks, different things like this. So VPN worked. The limitation of a VPN and where sort of zero trust becomes, much more effective is that think of at the simplest form, VPN, I log into my VPN and I log into Trend Micro and I'm in. Great, and I can move through the entire organization without ever being asked again if I'm Andrew. So if someone had somehow breached, Andrew and had his VPN credentials, as soon as they used that VPN and logged in, they could then move laterally through the entire organization. Zero trust changes that. And you sometimes see zero trust, always verify is kind of the tagline you'll hear in that. And the idea is, sure, zero trust lets me in, but each time I want to access a different asset, it's going to ask me to confirm that again. It's going to say, hey, are you, we're going to send you, an alert here. Are you Andrew Humphrey? And what's going to come up is somewhere along the lines, you're not going to be able to pass those. So you're going to get sort of slowed down trying to move through the network or caught moving through the network. And that's where zero trust comes in. And it is really, really an effective tool in catching people moving around within your network. And that's really the evolution of VPNs and where you're going to see that go, because you want to be catching people when they're moving around. The other thing zero trust can do is it can look at have role-based escalations. So they can say, okay, we've got Andrew, he's in our network. He's trying to access this payroll file. Andrew has no business in this payroll file. It's probably not Andrew because, we know Andrew and he's pretty busy just doing his sales thing. He's not in here snooping around. So if someone says they're Andrew and they're snooping around, that's probably a bad actor. And they can isolate that account, look into it. You'll hear a term frequently used called sandboxing. The idea is anytime you have any of these problems, you sandbox it, which is where you can basically execute these things or open up these users, and they're really isolated to that one core spot, and you can find out what's going on. So if you had malware, any kind of problems, you'd sandbox them and either execute or detonate or whatever you want to call them there, and then see what happens. And you're either going to find it's a completely safe file, and it gets sent on its way, or in fact you did find malware and you're going to release that. And I see Shashi has another hand up here, so I'll just let him jump on if he wants to kind of touch on that ZTNA or really anything he sort of has on his mind right now. Go ahead, Shashi.
Sorry, I think I was just not that familiar with Google Meets. I was looking at the wrong spot for the chat side. Recently popped up, so I'm looking at the questions now. So my apologies for that. I just wanted to address some of the questions before it gets before we run out of time. So I think one of the questions I had, if I go up, is an XDR source solution. So it's from Sean. So Sean, XDR is a function where it can again enhance the SOAR, right? So SOAR is mostly what automation and response would look like. But again, like a SIM solution, it's looking at various breadth of technologies. It's not necessarily focused on security. So what we are doing is, like, if you have a good robust SOAR platform, we can automate and augment and enhance that with the Intel and the Workbench alerts we are able to give, because of being a purely platform which is looking at a threat. So XDR is able to do that and enhance that SOAR integration. Some of the solutions you'll see have some sort of SOAR features built in. Like the platform we work on, we present, that also has a lot of features. But SOAR has many different attributes as well. XDR, if you have an XDR, that is mostly security focused, and if you have a SOAR solution, most SOAR solutions integrate well with the XDR solutions, and it does enhance that. So hopefully that is, like, there is a bit of overlap, but it's vastly like what are the key use cases, right? So hope that addresses that. Moving on to the next question, I think we addressed the market share thing. Difference between threat intel management and attack surface management. So Anik, I hope I called that, I didn't butcher your name. So Anik, what we are looking at, so threat intel management means, like, if you have a platform, how well you are integrating all the threat intelligence sources, right? So it could be some of the taxi feeds you are subscribed to, it could be some of the MISP services you have subscribed to. But when you ingest that, right, so you should have a platform, all this intelligence is good, but what do you do with that, right? So with the threat intelligence platform, so for example, if I get time, I'm going to show you what ideally a platform should be able to do is, like, ingest all those threat intelligence sources. It could be any of the services you are subscribed to, right? And then run, possibly scan for suspicious objects, or all the intel what you're getting, you should be able to run an auto sweep against your environment, that, okay, this is the intel I got from there. How does it look? Because the intel is in the public domain, it doesn't necessarily looks at the specific environment you might be working on. So what happens with an XDR platform, if it has all those threat intelligence sources, you are able to run an auto sweep and know, okay, for this specific threat, these are the compromised endpoint users, or whatever the threat is, like what you're looking at then, and you can respond to how to mitigate those, right? So that is where threat intelligence and attack surface looks like. Again, an attack surface, like to what Andrew described earlier, is kind of a more proactive way. So I would say, like, think of it like you're getting some sensors that like, hey, your door is not properly closed, like driver door ajar, so something like that. You're looking at those symbols, but if you don't respond to it, most likely you meet it with an accident, and that is where detection and response comes in. Like, something has happened and you respond to it. Whereas attack surface management is like looking at kind of possible signals, like this could be wrong, there's this vulnerability. You take proactive action on that rather than waiting for threat actors to exploit those vulnerabilities. Hope that makes sense.
Yeah, that was great. Thank you, Shashi.
Yeah.
So Shashi's going to run a demo of some of this stuff, so we can really see it in action here in a second. And I'll just touch on a couple of last point here. One thing I like to talk about whenever I talk about security is just good cyber hygiene, because there's a lot of ways you can spend a ton of money to get good security, but there's a lot of free stuff that you can do that's just going to make yourself less risk. So especially for a user, you don't want to have any kind of financial problems or anything like this for cybersecurity. So some things you can do: change your passwords frequently. Make sure you're not using them in multiple places. I mean, it sounds silly, but most people don't do this. Even though they know it, they're just, it's easier to not have complex passwords. I don't want to use the word lazy because I don't want to call anyone lazy, but it's just easy not to have good password, policy. So make sure you're doing that. It's really important. Be reasonably cautious. So don't click on any links or take actions requested by strangers. Most breaches we see start in emails from strangers with links where you're clicking on them. Because one of the ones that's going around right now in one of our email boxes is a Microsoft 365, and it's nothing to do with Microsoft, so it's not their fault. But it's someone impersonating them and saying, "Hey, you need to update your MFA," and the link in there. I mean, I wouldn't click it. We just send it off. But we're seeing those very commonly, and that's typically the starting point. So, and then don't trust unusual requests from known contacts or known users. So this is what's called business email compromise. So if you get an email from your boss saying, hey, wire this money or do this, or something that's just kind of out of whack what they would normally say, message that person or call that person directly and get them to corroborate what they're looking to have you do. And you're going to say, okay, that's a business email compromise. It wasn't actually my boss asking me to do that or asking me to give him my SIN number. It was a business email compromise where someone compromised that executive's email and sent out, messages. It's something that happens quite often, especially if you work in finance. If you work in finance, these people, anyone, if you know someone working in finance, you can ask them about it. They'll always have some interesting stories there where they've received emails to make payments that were fictitious payments. Keep up to date. So make sure you know what's going on out there. Look at things like vishing or quishing. So vishing would be voice phishing. So if someone would call you with what would typically be a phishing email, but it would be actually over a phone call, and they might ask you to say, hey, I'm going to send you an MFA code. Tell me what it is, because I'm the internal IT. And that's what happened. MGM in Vegas got hacked. If you saw that hack, it started with a vishing hack. So someone in their customer support answered a telephone call, got an MFA prompt, and then gave that MFA prompt over the phone. And that was their entry point into MGM's network. And from there, they just wreaked havoc. Quishing, you might see an email with a QR code in it. Don't, out of curiosity, scan the QR code. It's probably a quishing one where it's going to lead you to a fake website. Update. So always be updated. The reason companies put out updates is because there are vulnerabilities in the software. So they've corrected those through updates. And when that update goes out, any let's say bad actor now knows about this exploit. So now they're going to go out there and look to see who isn't up to date. So once they learn about this Microsoft Smart Screen thing, some of the best hackers probably already knew about it, but not all of them did. And then when it came out with a patch, then everybody learned about it. And if you didn't install that patch, even just call like a script kiddie, or even just like your most amateur, they're in high school grade 9 kind of hacker, they're going to find people who don't have that update in place and they're going to exploit it. So make sure you're updating. So critical. And then when you have a problem, know where in your organization you should go when you have a problem. For example, at Trend, it's 911@trend.com. So that's the email address. Anything you have that's fishy or you're suspicious of something, it goes there and they act on it right away. So you don't see a bad email and then forward it to your boss and say, hey, does this look fishy? Like, there's a proper way to do it, and make sure you're aware of what that is. And then just one thing I'll touch on lastly, internet for safety for kids and families. It's something that I present to a lot of school groups, presented to recently the Scouts and a lot of different ones. And it's just really keeping safe online. It's really good for amateur users. It's designed at kids. There also is a family and sort of an adult piece. So if you happen to have children in this, it's great to kind of go on there and in a fun way learn about how they can stay safe online. Or if maybe you have aging parents who are doing some things online, and you want to protect them because they're certainly a vulnerable group right now, they can go on here and learn about how they might be targeted and then not have to worry about those things. But I won't spend much time there, but you'll see the presentation up in the video. So feel free to follow the links and check it out. It's all free and it's just great knowledge. And then lastly, this is my contact info. So if you have any sort of follow-up questions, anything you're curious about, really about anything about things I've chatted about today, maybe about joining the workforce or different things like that, happy to chat. You can just talk about, quishing or QR code phishing. I can assure you that is a legitimate QR code, which will link to my LinkedIn page. So feel free to follow me. And I would say a good thing to do, you could follow me and then see who I follow, and then follow, the same kind of people that I'm following. And it'll give you a lot of, insight and knowledge in cybersecurity. And it's going to be critical for finding your first job or your first couple of jobs. It's a great way to get started. I think we might describe LinkedIn as a necessary evil. I don't know that everyone loves being on there, but I will say that, that's it's going to help your career, which I would imagine for a lot of young folks here, you're trying to, get that going. So it's going to help you do that. So that's myself. And I hope you enjoyed the presentation today. I hope you found that, insightful and you learned some new things. As I said, follow up, reach out. And now we'll have Shashi, he'll take over here and he'll run us through a demo of our Vision 1 piece. And it'll actually show you kind of what these look like. So you can pull up a workbench and do some different things and actually show you this in action. So I'll stop my presentation here. I'll let Shashi take over, and we're all set.
Great. Thank you so much, Andrew, for this great presentation. And thank you, Shashi, also for joining us today. How long will it take, Shashi, for this demo?
Sorry, I can go fast. Let me share my screen.
Because we want to keep a few minutes for people to ask if they have more questions.
Yeah, and I think once you see things like I think like it's gonna draw more questions there, which I can definitely address. I
Okay.
hope you guys are able to see my screen.
Yes, we can. Yes.
Okay. So, really quickly about me, I'm Shashi Gautam. I've been here. I'm a sales engineer with Trend Micro. Been over here for more than 2 years now, and 3 years now. Sorry, based out of Calgary, so not too far from where you are. And basically, what I do, what I would like here is like everything what Andrew has asked. But what does that look like in real life, right? So you know about like as all smart folks out there, you know about you do have some basic hygiene about cybersecurity and everything. Is there a problem? Are you guys able to hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay,
Yes.
I don't know. I'm keep getting so many pop-ups here. So ideally I would say is like a platform for for having a robust security posture. You should have a platform where you are able to have an overall look of what your overall risk posture looks like, right? And do you look at risk posture? Because you're not looking at individual endpoints and stuff like that. As you'll see on the left side of things, like you're looking at endpoints, you're looking at cloud security, you're looking at network, you're looking at email, mobile security, you name it, right? That includes all, let's say, your Google identity, your Office 365 and stuff. When you combine all of that, you get kind of a risk score, right? So, like what Andrew was describing, like, okay, this is my risk posture, but let's say if my peers are doing, their average risk score is lower, it's always good to be lower on the riskier side, right? So, how do I reduce that, right? So, but maybe a lot of you since we initially addressed the XDR, right? And let's address the elephant in the room. Everybody has been at some point got those emails. Like, what happens when you actually click on a phishing email, right? So what happens is that when you have a robust robust protection platform, it would trigger something. I think other vendors call it a different name. We at Trend, we call it a workbench, right? So workbench means like it brings everything together rather than a SIM tool where we are looking at individual log items and trying to find something from the event viewer or where log messages if you're on Unix. What a platform should be able to do is like for a security analyst to tie everything together and show you which object was received, who clicked on it, who forwarded on it, right? And then which endpoint it was or laptop it was received from. And then what you're able to do if you have a robust security platform, you are able to look at the email and you are able to delete or quarantine right from here rather than waiting for the user to click on it and waiting for other users who they have forwarded it to, right? You are able to delete and quarantine it. The malicious attachment which was there, you are able to add it to the block list. Or further, if you're not sure like what it might do, you are able to submit it for sandbox analysis, right? To whom the user was sent, right? So what you're able to do is like look at the user who may have clicked on it. So let's say the internal user you have here, here it is, right? So the internal user who may have clicked on it, right? What you're able to do is like most likely because this was a phishing email, you are able to disable the user account right there and force them sign out, right? So these are like the kind of things you are able to do. And of course, like if the sender, the malicious sender, you are able to blocklist. What this does is like, and as an ideal platform, this shouldn't just delete and quarantine from the user who may have clicked on those phishing email, but from the entire Exchange or Outlook or Office 365, whichever you're doing, right? So that more users don't click on it. So this is what an XDR protection would ideally look like. And of course, like what you're able to do is that you're able to automate all of these. Should be able to automate all of these through playbooks. Something which we have on our platforms, and most I think quite a few mature XDR platforms have. What happens with the mature this playbooks is like if you got an phishing email and a user accidentally clicked on it just before holidays or something like that, you don't have to come back after holidays to find out the gap. The playbooks get kicked into action and you are able to address those, right? So let's say the device which was used, you are able to isolate that. The user you are able to isolate from your Active Directory, and the email you are able to delete or quarantine, right? So this is what an email attack would look like, right? So but what about let's say how do I prevent that, right? So the term attack surface risk management, why it's finding so much traction is Like, of course, like there would be attacks, and there would be those phishing emails keep coming in, and somebody would accidentally click it. But how do I prevent such kind of attacks, right? Like, prevention is always better than cure, as the old adage goes, right? So what an ideal platform should be able to do is, like, when it's ingesting all those sources, it paints a kind of a risk picture for you, right? So what happens is that if you're able to, let me show you here. Where is it? Sorry, here. So what it would be, you would be able to do is, when you're accessing all the devices and the user accounts and behaviors, so the devices with, if your platform is able to kind of give you a risk score or something like that, the devices with the highest risk score, for some reason, it could be like because of a lot of vulnerabilities out there which hasn't been patched, or let's say the user accounts which are using those, they don't have the best user hygiene. Threat attackers would always go for the easy targets, and those devices with higher risk score, those users with higher risk score, they are the low hanging fruits, right? So, and ideally in a platform, what you should be able to do is, like, if you have a risk profiling kind of like that, most likely that the workbench which I showed you previously, it was a user who already had a pretty high risk score, right? So when you click on that, you should be able to get more information, right? So what happens with this is, with an attack surface based approach, more proactive approach, is that you are able to take a look at the risk score, right? Which tells you, like, okay, everything was going fine. Something may have happened which tipped up the risk score, right? It also gives you something which Andrew was talking about, right? Like, if you're seeing some logins across, like, some different geos on within a very pretty short span of time, most likely there's impossible travel and somebody has compromised the account, right? So if you see things like that, what you're able to do is, like, rather than waiting for the attacker to compromise this user, you are able to create a awareness training for them, or off the beat, you should be able to disable the user or force them sign out, or block critical applications to them, so that this user cannot cause more damage. And of course, like, once they have, let's say, turn on whatever the risk factors are, that you should set your password, or you haven't turned on multi-factor authentication. When they do that, their risk score comes back, you put them back into the system, right? So what this will do is, like, as a security analyst, you're preventing those detection and response, the XDR alerts, right? Which is like, something has happened, some phishing email has been clicked, or this user has been compromised, and then you're trying to firefight. Rather than firefighting, you're making sure that everything is accordance and you have nipped it in the bud. More importantly, what will happen is, like, when you take action on those higher risk items, your risk score would come down as well, right? And I'm pretty sure, as all you guys are student, not old bloke like me, most of you are cloud native, right? So a lot of thing is happening in the cloud space, right? Because cloud is, believe it or not, still the wild west. Everybody is having those automation templates. They are spinning up virtual machines. They are showing up in the environment. But even if you're just a single cloud shop, a lot of challenge comes with the visibility, right? So ideally, you should have, as a security person, you should have visibility, right, across everything happening. Where are your resources? And then, more importantly, again, rather than waiting for an attack to happen, you're looking at kind of a risk posture. So higher the risk posture, higher the possibility that this would be compromised by somebody, right? Then the other challenge, what this comes to the security groups, are like, okay, you're looking at an EC2 instance or EC2 security group. You don't know what is tied to that, right? So, and ideally, a security platform, what it should be able to do is, like, when you're proactively looking at it, it should be able to tell you that, okay, this is the risk score, but it should also be able to tell you what other assets are tied to it, right? So that you can paint a potential attack path to that resource. So yeah, just a perfect day for it to slow down. Why not? But what happens here is that once you look, let me, I'll just use here. Tax service discovery. Sorry, guys, this is just bump here.
Yeah, live demos always add an
Running
extra
out of
element of risk.
time. Like, can you have 1 or 2 more minutes so I can
Yeah,
get 2 extra minutes
I'm
to
almost done,
discuss?
actually.
Okay.
Because I think like because we are talking about what's next, right? Like we have been doing security, we have been looking at security the that way. So what happens is like when you're looking at the cloud assets, right? So you're feeding in different sensor, as you can see, like all the multi-cloud platforms they are feeding in. Ideally, this gives you a pretty good dashboard. But more importantly, when you're looking at the resources, individual resources, you're looking at the risk score, right? So ideally, if you take action on the higher risk score items, you mitigate those risks first, and then when you click on those risk scores, right, like you can look at the risk scores on the higher side, but more importantly, what is causing it, right? And then you are able to look into what is causing it, and more importantly, you're looking at all the tied the attack path, right? So if this resource had to be attacked, it is the attack path would be here, where it's some user will try to get into the internet gateway, then through the subnet, and then the user itself, right? So these are like some of the ways where you, if you take action, or if you have more information there, you are able to take more proactive action and prevent things like that in the first place. And of course, like I think there was one question asked on the threat intelligence side. I can go on and on, and like on this, I think we are pretty short on time, but I hope like that gives you like a fair bit of idea where XDR is, where you are able to kind of like respond to any kind of threat which may have happened, whereas you're also looking at what are the risky resources already which are you're getting potentially red signals, and then you take action so that you don't respond to threats, you're preventing threats in the first place. I'll just keep it short. I think we are over time there, so that is pretty much it. And again, I would love to go on and on. I do this and I love this platform, and I just like talking about cybersecurity in general, but I would just end it here. Thank you so much, guys.
Thank you, Shashi, so much. So I'll give 2 minutes for our audience to ask if they have any questions. Like your microphones now are turned on. Do we have any questions? 2 quick questions, please. Yes, Nikhil. Yes, they are joining from our classroom. So Nikhil, please go ahead.
I think is it the question you asking, how do you calculate the risk score and other things? So I'll just maybe address that, and maybe he's having an audio issue. So the way we calculate the risk score is like you look at the individual risk score, and then depending on, let's say, if you look at a server, not every server will be equal. So if you're running some mission critical Oracle application on it, that has more criticality than just a regular file and print server, right? And when you, on top of that, when you look at something like what vulnerabilities it is exposed to, which you should be able to through a platform, then how many of highly exploited vulnerabilities it is exposed to. When you tie all those factors together, right, and all the events happening, that gives you kind of a risk score. Like that is how our platform at least approaches to risk score, so that when you're trying to address vulnerabilities, vulnerabilities are the single, like like what Andrew talked about, like the Microsoft vulnerability. But maybe the risk score is based on, is it just a server in a dev environment which is exposed to that vulnerability, or is it one of your mission critical SQL or Oracle servers which is exposed to that vulnerability, right? When you do that, tie that to, hey, the administrator who's using the risk, that server himself or herself has a higher risk score, that makes the risk score higher. So when you look at those risk score, you are able to kind of prioritize which needs to be taken action first. Hope that helps.
Yes, Richard, please go ahead.
Hey there, probably a very vague question, but if I was running a shop and I had no SIEM, no SOAR, no XDR or anything, and I wanted to get caught up, how big of a project is that? Is that a 1 week, 1 month, 1 year? Because I assume I can't just install it and it'll automatically know everything. I assume I need to tweak it, get a pattern of life for what right looks like before I just start isolating everyone's accounts.
Yeah. The short answer to that is a forever process. So the good or bad thing about cybersecurity is that it's always a cat and mouse game. You, like Andrew said, you always have to be on top of your game. There's no such thing as you turn it on and it solves all your problems. So that's why firewall. I mean, I'm gonna get a lot of hate for this, but firewall is not the approach, or VPN is not the approach, where it's like you turn on a perimeter and then it's all wild west for you. You can do pretty much anything. That's why we have, you would hear terms like zero trust, which is like in real time analyzing every activity, every website, every clicks you're doing, so that if you do anything suspicious right off the bat, it would block anything like that. I would say like if you're onboarding something, the good thing about like the modern SaaS-based approach is like it doesn't take a lot of time to onboard, especially if you're cloud native. You could be literally all those information I was showing you, you could be literally up and running in 30 minutes and have the full visibility and everything of the risk code, the risk index, and everything like that within a span of 30 minutes. If that helps, and then you can take it from there, like how much further you want to go. And then you have to make sure that you stay ahead of the curve, right? Because then you prevent those attacks in the first place.
Great. Thank you so much, Andrew and Shashi, again for this great presentation and all this information. So please be sure to provide us guys with your name and email address in the linked form, so we send you your certificate. And we hope to see you all in our next InfoSec seminar on April 10 at 12 p.m. Thank you all, and goodbye.
Bye now.
Thanks
Thanks for coming.
Thank you for your time. Wonderful interactions. Bye-bye.